Hi, everyone. For those who joined, we'll just get started in just a moment. So hang tight. We'll be getting started momentarily. I still see some folks coming in, so we'll give it just a few more seconds here, and then we will kick us off in just a few minutes, actually less than a few minutes, so just hang tight.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our quarterly government relations webinar. We are so happy to have you and glad that you're here to learn about NAEA's advocacy efforts. My name is Meg Killian. I'm the NAEA EVP, and we have with us today Jeff Trinka and Thad Ng from Van Scoyoc, our esteemed colleagues in Washington, who are going to share with us an update of what's going on in Washington and what NAEA's current advocacy efforts are. Before we get started, though, just a couple of housekeeping items. We will be recording this today, and we'll be posting it on YouTube. If you have any questions, we will be doing a short Q&A at the end of the presentation, and you can put those questions in the Q&A portion of the Zoom. And if you have any technical issues or you want to chat with the team or each other, please do so in the chat feature on the Zoom call here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Thad and Jeff. Thanks, guys.
Great. Thanks, Meg. So Thad Inch, if I don't know anyone that's out there, I'm at Van Scoyoc Associates and serve as legislative counsel for NAEA and work closely with Jeff Trinka, who I imagine most of you guys know. Jeff, if you want to give a wave or a hello. And we've got so the roadmap for today is I'm going to go through some congressional updates, just kind of what's the latest in Washington, what's going on. And then Jeff is going to give some IRS updates. And then we'll talk through some of the NAEA priorities, a few of the things that we've been working on. And then talk a little bit about what's on the horizon, what the next few months, things that we will be looking out for. And then we'll open it up to Q&A. And you guys can, we can, whether it's, more IRS specific stuff or more general political stuff, we're happy to talk about whatever is on your mind. So I will go ahead and get started with the congressional update. So Congress just got back. They were out for 2 weeks over the 4th of July. And this time of year, people really start counting down the legislative days because, as you know, Congress is famous for sort of leaving everything until the last minute. And the congressional calendar starts because of all the recesses and, leaving early for elections and other stuff. The actual days that they're in session, doing work start to dwindle. And so everyone is back this week, both the House and the Senate. The House, I believe, is in until the end of July, and then the Senate is staying an extra week into the first week of August. So they've got a few weeks here to try to get a lot of stuff done. We'll talk about some of the things that are on their agenda. And then, as they always do, they'll leave for an August recess and not come back until after Labor Day. And then September will really be a sprint as well because the federal fiscal year ends the end of September. And so there's always a lot of things that need to get done, including the federal budget. Oftentimes it's just an extension or short-term, continuing resolution. But that will be on the table when they get back. And then in an election year, Congress normally gets leaves for much of October because they're going home to campaign. We've got election day, November 8th. And I think this year's what they call the lame duck session is the period between the election and when the new Congress gets sworn in. And there's a lot of anticipation that a lot of stuff could potentially get done during the lame duck session, because you have folks, a new Congress coming in. There's oftentimes a desire to kind of clean the decks and get some stuff done. It's not always as partisan because folks have just been through the elections. And you also have a lot of members retiring this year that kind of have their pet projects that they want to get done. So lots of eyes on the lame duck session and on how much tax stuff will actually be included. You know, there will likely be some kind of appropriations bill, and then they normally attach other items, and so we're watching closely to see, will there be an extenders package or other tax items as part of that. Another date that is kind of sneaking up on a lot of people that we're keeping an eye on is the IRS commissioner's term is expiring on November 12th. And we'll probably talk about this a little later, but we have heard that the White House and Department of Treasury are talking to potential candidates and sort of starting the process of trying to get someone nominated, you know, here in the next few months and confirmed as soon as possible. Sometimes that is easier said than done, finding someone that, you know, is qualified that wants the job, and then obviously going through the confirmation process in the Senate, which can be pretty extensive and challenging these days. But we are expecting to get a new IRS commissioner. And then of course, in early January, on January 3rd, the new Congress is going to be sworn in. And, you know, regardless of what happens in the elections, there's lots of retirements. There's going to be lots of change. I think a lot of folks think that the elections will shake things up as well. And so, you know, there's always a different sort of tenor and feel of Congress when you have a new Congress come in. But thinking about the rest of this year, you know, what are the top congressional priorities? What are those things that they're trying to really push through before the August recess, and then when they get back from that? And a couple of things we just wanted to point out. Obviously, inflation is, you know, driving the news. We had the numbers come out today that were even higher than expected. That's been the big story economically for the last couple of months. And while initially the administration and a number of folks in Congress were sort of, you know, saying this is short term, this is transitory, it's based on sort of the leftover impacts of COVID and the supply chains. The realization set in, I think, a few months ago for many that this was actually real and a lot bigger than folks expected. And so that's driven a lot of conversation on the Hill, both around spending, deficit reduction, and issues, whether it's like the gas tax or keeping the cost of prescription drugs down. And then obviously it's driving a lot of activity with the Federal Reserve in terms of raising interest rates. Gun violence is another one that, you know, most recently there was the issues on the 4th of July, but before that, the shootings in Texas and other situations that caused a lot of grief and did sort of the unusual thing of forcing some bipartisan action. The Congress in June passed and the president signed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. It's not the most robust, you know, gun law in the world, but it does expand some background checks for folks that are under 21. Does some other things around mental health and closing some loopholes on how people purchase guns. The budget, I mentioned the budget briefly. So right now we're kind of in the heart of the appropriations process. The House has been sort of making progress on a lot of their bills, and the Senate is closely behind. The House Appropriations Committee had about $1 billion increase for IRS. That's a number that we're always watching closely. it's a pretty significant increase, but when you factor in inflation, of course, it's not as it's not as big as we would like to see. And then the Senate has not released their bill yet, but we're expecting that in the next couple of weeks. And then I'll just mention briefly, one of the big legislative priorities is this competition bill with China. So this gets into the semiconductor issue, bringing manufacturing back to the United States. This is a bipartisan effort that they're working on right now. There is some other politics involved around how this interacts with other bills, but this has been a big priority for Congress and something they might be able to get done this year. So I always feel like a broken record when we bring up reconciliation or Build Back Better, because this is the big economic stimulus package that Biden put forward, I believe last summer, or maybe even before last summer. And then Joe Manchin famously blew up in December when he said, "I can't be for this." With reconciliation, they need all 50 Democrats to vote for the bill, and then they can move it with a simple majority. And so since that Build Back Better bill sort of blew up in December, there have been quiet talks happening. And I say quiet, there's been, rumblings of negotiations going on this entire year, but those have increased recently, primarily between Senator Manchin and Majority Leader Schumer. And we got some news last week that some agreements had been made on some potential provisions, one around reducing the cost of prescription drugs, one on some Medicare taxes that would apply the Medicare tax to some pass-through income that currently is not being taxed. But whether they can actually pull this off and get a scaled back package through Congress before the end of the year, and they're saying even before the August recess out of the Senate, is still yet to be seen. There's lots of thorny issues. I list here the ACA premium tax subsidies that went into effect during COVID. Those expire at the end of the year. They're very popular, but they're also very expensive. And so that's something that's on the table. The SALT caps, the state and local tax deduction caps, the Northeast, which obviously has high state and local taxes. A number of members from like Josh Gottheimer from New Jersey, a number of members from the New York delegation have said they will not support a reconciliation package unless it fixes or increases the SALT caps. And then raising taxes generally. There's this surtax on wealthy individuals, those with more than 10 million or more than 25 million in income annually. That was part of the PASS package. And so there are lots of outstanding issues that they would have to come to terms with to be able to move forward a reconciliation package. But they're working at it really hard. So I would put it at about 50-50, but progress is being made. And one item, we'll probably mention this later, but one item we are watching closely and pushing for is the IRS funding piece. The original Build Back Better bill had $80 billion over 10 years, which is a huge amount of money for IRS that would have really given the agency a surge to kind of update technology, staffing, a range of things, assuming they spin it well, which is what we were also pushing for. So we're watching to see if this comes together, whether that's included. Some of the tax proposals that were initially part of Build Back Better, it was an increase in the corporate rate, increase in the top individual rate, increased capital gains. Because of the 50 vote requirement, a lot of that stuff ended up going away. Senator Sinema ended up coming out, said she was not going to support those kind of tax increases. They needed her vote. And so before Manchin, blew up the bill in December, they had actually scaled it back, taken a lot of those tax increases out, but they had included that surtax on multimillionaires, and then also a 15% minimum domestic corporate tax rate. So for companies that were, paying super low corporate taxes. And as I said, those tax discussions remain really fluid. And it's kind of that balance between deficit reduction. Manchin and others are saying, hey, we got to bring down the deficit because that'll help with inflation. But in order to do that, you have to raise revenue, and folks obviously don't like raising taxes. One piece I wanted to mention, and this might be impacting, some of you guys personally or some of your clients, is one piece of legislation that has a lot of bipartisan support that is likely to move this year is these retirement bills. So there's a few different bills. Secure 2.0 is what passed out of the House that some folks might have heard of. And that was a bipartisan bill between Kevin Brady and Richie Neal on the Ways and Means Committee, and has a lot of stuff in there to encourage more small businesses and more individuals to adopt retirement plans. And then the Senate Finance Committee released their own bill and passed it out of committee recently. It's now called the EARN Act. And it's very similar to Secure 2.0, but kind of has its own flavor of stuff. And then the Senate Help Committee, which is the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, had its own bill called the Rise and Shine Act, which had a lot of overlap, but then some different things as well, such as savings accounts and some other features. So where things stand now is there's kind of unified agreement that this is a good thing, that it would be great to pass a big retirement package that really incentivizes small businesses to start plans and more people to save for retirement. But they're trying to work out the differences between these bills with the hope that they can move something probably in the lame duck session if there is a sort of big end of year package. And that would bode well for other tax provisions, since a lot of this is tax related, being added as well that could impact us. Just quickly on the EARN Act, and this is kind of, parts of Secure 2.0 as well. Some of the changes they're making, one is for employers to treat student loans, worker student loan repayments as the same as 401k contributions. So essentially, a lot of 25-year-olds say, I don't want to start giving to my 401k because I need to pay off my student loan. Well, this would allow if someone gave $500 to their student loan, then their employer could turn around and match it with $500 to the 401k with the same tax advantage that they currently receive for making a 401k match. So that's an interesting change. It increases the minimum age which workers must begin drawing down their retirement savings. It increases it to 75. And I think it's 72. It had just gone to 72, I think, a few years ago with a recent bill, but that would raise it even more. It would create a lost and found retirement plan database to reconnect workers with retirement benefits from past jobs. It raises the mandatory retirement plan cash out distributions from 7 to 5. And then one that I find really interesting, it increases tax credits for small employer retirement plan startup costs. So if you have, clients that don't currently have a retirement plan, what they passed a few years ago was a tax credit that said if you start up a plan, you could get 50% of those startup costs back in a tax credit. And so let's say it cost you $4,000, it's up to $5,000. So let's say it cost you $4,000 to start the plan. You can currently get $2,000 back in a tax credit. This increases that to 100%. And so folks could get that full amount of startup costs back in a tax credit if this goes through. With that, I am going to hand it over to Jeff to talk about some fun IRS stuff.
So I'm not going to tell this group anything they don't already know, but the IRS is drowning. I was trying to think of a good analogy. I just got out of the woods with 24 boys. You can't call them Boy Scouts anymore because they're girls too, but scouts who learned how to kayak and canoe and everything else. And one of the things we were teaching them about is these hydro loops that you have for in currents, you have in waterfalls. And what happens is people go over these waterfalls small, but they get caught in this loop and they just keep looping around until they drown. And right now, that's what the agency is happening to the agency. I mean, it starts with return processing. Every time they get, feels like they're starting to catch up a little bit, lo and behold, another filing season deadline comes up, and people keep filing. That's my wife. They keep filing paper, unfortunately, and the agency is from leftover from the pandemic and shutdowns and everything else. They just have mounds and mounds of paper, and they're never really getting ahead. But you also are seeing the phones wait times have gotten to the point where you can't get through it all. To get your power of attorneys, 8821s and everything on CAF is stretching to the times that are completely making them almost completely useless to help your clients. So you've got all of these needs. The agency is essentially, I'm going to mix metaphors now. I'm going to move on to the Bible. Robbing Peter to pay Paul. So they're taking people off of CAF, they're taking people off the phones, and they're putting them into processing. These are people who don't necessarily do return processing. So what are you seeing? You're seeing lots of errors. And so on top of the fact that we have unfiled or unprocessed returns, the ones that are getting processed are having high error rates, and therefore increasing the needs for phones or some way to get on CAF so you can respond to notices that should not have been sent. Then the agency shuts down and doesn't send out notices. And a lot of our folks, they make their living from helping people with their IRS problems. So I will assure everyone on this call and every enrolled agent that's a member of the National Association of Enrolled Agents that we are very much aware of this, and we are being as squeaky a wheel as possible. I will say that the agency's usual thick skin is now about a foot thick because us, the Hill, the other professional organizations, and we'll go through some of the letters and coalitions. I see things on social media. Boy, if we would just join forces with the AICPA. We've joined forces with the AICPA and the bar so much lately that I'm sick of them, but we are still doing it. We are doing everything we possibly can, and the agency is stuck in that hydro loop and they're drowning. So you'd think, okay, well, let's just give them more money. That is important, but there is an issue. Just like I just went on a vacation out west before I was stuck with all these Boy Scouts, and everywhere I went out west, there was a sign that said, please be kind to our staffs, we're understaffed. And they're going to have long wait times just to get a couple of hamburgers because they can't hire people. So we are competing with the private sector or the IRS is. And so even though they do have some funding and they are prioritizing 2,500 new folks to help with get these tax returns under control, get them processed, things like background checks are taking months. Just the hiring and the ability to compete is very difficult. So the IRS is whatever is out there in the economy is exacerbated for the agency. And meanwhile, they just keep going around and around deep underwater. Is there another slide? I think there's another slide there, isn't there?
Yeah, you want to mention the numbers on here, and these are fresh numbers. We just pulled these.
Yeah, I mean,
it's more of the same, but
yeah, I mean, the issue with these numbers is these are almost all paper, and it doesn't look like a lot compared to what they have to do. But you got 1040s, you have 1040Xs, you have 941s, which are 50% of them are coming in on paper. So the agency needs to change their business processes to make 941's electronic filings much more, much more easier and convenient for small businesses, or else they're just not going to do it on a voluntary basis. And we saw what happens with the employee retention tax credit, and there was a requirement that they had to go back and do these amended. And in that area, unlike with the 1040s, which the agency changed during the pandemic, you have to file it on paper. There's also some other issues around that that's going to cause folks, small businesses, to have to go back and amend their 1040s. And so it's like I said, it's just the cycle that keeps going around. So to me, when I look at those numbers, I'm not terribly awed by those numbers. But while we were sitting here, the 1040 number probably went up to 12 million. And so and then you're going to get to a month from now is the second filing season. It's like the Hobbits, the second breakfast. And then they're going to get into filing season. And so they're going to be right back in there. But meanwhile, this commissioner is doing everything he can to bring more people online. And so hopefully the head will pop up above water and the agency will stop drowning. But I think the IRS is due for some new management. I think they're due for some better funding, more consistent funding from Congress. Yeah, so these are the issues that everyone knows about. I mean, you've got you've got long lines, so people are going to these calling services, and everyone complains, oh, they're getting in front of the line and everything, but they are having their own total breakdown, because even though they're promising people faster times, they're still not fast enough to, the agency's calls wait times going to an hour and a half. They're not be able to do it, and you're paying a lot of money. You have you have these incredibly long CAF times. And then, just as it looked like we might have a little bit of break on getting through and getting authenticated faster online, you have the big brouhaha about ID Me. The interesting thing, I'm going to say this, I said it to the press on Monday, is that the IRS came to us repeatedly, and we were at lots of different forums. The IRS said, hey, what would you think about a system where you would use your face to ID yourself? And everyone said, wow, that'd be great. And then when the came out, they were using a private vendor who was collecting all this facial recognition data, and everyone, was uncomfortable with that. That's the best way to put it. That gets back to Congress, and now the agency is kind of back to square one on that. Anything else I should bring up there, Thad?
I think that's good, and I think we'll get into more probably in the Q&A.
Yeah.
I see a few questions have already come in. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, and I also want to make clear that this is just a few examples, a few concrete examples we wanted to share. We are having lots of discussions on a regular basis with IRS, both on our own and through some of the more organized coalitions that we've been a part of, and also with the Hill. And the Hill meetings are sort of proactive policy meetings. And then also through the PAC, it's created lots of opportunities to have dialogue with members, both senators and congressmen. But when we kind of look at, what are the priorities, and we've got a priorities document that we use, and then we've got the white paper, which is obviously more detailed. I know that the next e-journal article is gonna have some stuff from the GRC committee on sort of what are the priorities of the committee. And so we've got lots of stuff that we're working on, but it all kind of comes back to some basic themes. And Jeff and I were talking yesterday, and he was sort of throwing out some of these themes and said, it all kind of flows under that. So I tried to kind of capture the essence of that under longstanding priorities. And the first one is just improving, for practitioners, improving IRS technology, online tools, and customer service. And that's everything on the digital side, from the phone lines to having qualified folks that can help address issues that come up. And so that's obviously, probably first and foremost, one of the top priorities of an NAEA and what we are trying to work on every day. The other one is expanding our presence with policymakers as a go-to source. And that gets back to leadership in the policy front, with the Hill being a resource that they can really rely on, come to, trust. That's something I think that's been built over a long period of time. But as new members of Congress come in, as new staffers come in, you have to constantly be, building that and maintaining that. And then the idea of protecting and enhancing the EA credential, making sure that we're fighting for parity, making sure that folks don't just say, oh, CPAs and attorneys, can sign this form or can do this, but that EAs are given the proper status and parity that they deserve. And also that sort of the ethics and background that, rigors that EAs have to go through are appreciated. And I think part of that is our legislative efforts around regulation of tax preparers, not just letting anyone, do tax preparation, because that has led to lots of problems. So, the white paper has tons of details. Our priorities list have tons of details, but they kind of come back to these core ideas of maintaining our reputation as EAs, and promoting ourselves as a resource on the Hill, specifically NAEA as a resource, and for the IRS, and then pushing the IRS to do a better job so we can better represent taxpayers. There's been, a number of meetings at IRS and on the Hill this year, op-eds, all kinds of stuff. But we wanted to point out a few letters that went up. I think the most, I want to say famous, I don't know if that's the right word, but one of the most noteworthy ones was when folks were really fed up earlier this fall and at the end of the summer because IRS was just not getting the message. And NAEA sent the IRS is broken letter, is what I kind of refer it to. And it went to every member of Congress. And we did get calls from members of Congress from offices that said, hey, we got that letter, like, can you guys, talk to us? Because this has been a huge problem with, with our constituents. Everyone's complaining about IRS. We would love to get more of your take. And it obviously got some, press as well, which I think, always gets IRS's attention and is also good for NAEA. But I put the quote from the letter. This is the news release that went out. Obviously, the letter went to went up to Secretary Yellen. But the quote, I just sort of was reading through it, and I thought this quote was appropriate, is with grave concern that based on input from frontline tax practitioners in the service of American taxpayers, I must report to you that the poor condition of the IRS, in fact, it should be considered broken and does not seem to be on track to be fixed anytime soon. And I think, to Jeff's earlier points, this is always a balance because we have to communicate these points of view. We have to express the frustration of our members, but we also need to be constructive and be a partner with the IRS. And so it's a constant balance between partnering with them, supporting them, but also, calling them out when they need to be called out and pushing them to do more. Another letter that we sent up to the Hill came in February as we got closer to tax filing season, and a lot of members were getting nervous based on the prior year when Congress passed a bill in March that had a bunch of tax changes that, had to be implemented quickly, that caused a lot of problems. Similar with the change in the tax day. It's not that folks aren't appreciative of sometimes having a little more time, but it's that lack of certainty and that sort of moving goalpost that can create havoc and make it hard to give guidance to your clients. And so the quote on this one was, in short, enacting retroactive tax changes in the midst of a filing season places undue stress on the tax administration system for the IRS and taxpayers and their representatives. So just making sure that Congress is always aware that there are implications when they just sort of change things willy-nilly and change things retroactively, which is, ERTC is the prime example of that. The increased fees for enrolled agents, this is one of those where the actual numbers don't look like a ton of money. I think it was $140 they were increasing it to. But when you look at where it was just a few years ago and how much they have raised the EA fee and just the principle of sort of how they view this fee and what they're trying to pay for it at the IRS, NAEA took a strong stance. We did op-eds, we discussed it, we were involved in press articles. There was a thorough comment letter that went up from the association. I know that others in the industry weighed in as well and did some op-eds and also made some good points. And Meg testified. There was a public hearing that the IRS holds on proposed regulations such as this. Meg testified on behalf of NAEA. We also got the Small Business Administration involved because IRS had certified that the increase would not have a significant impact on a substantial number of small businesses. And so SBA weighed in. They were able to arrange a high-level meeting at IRS to kind of focus on those points. We still don't know what the outcome is. I think we're, realistic in that there probably will be an EA fee increase. I think a best case scenario would be, if it was maybe a little less than initially proposed, but we're not sure how that's going to shake out. But just another issue that we were active on late this spring. And then Jeff mentioned the coalition. So, and I'll go to the next slide because it's got the logos of all the groups that were involved. I would say AICPA and NAEA were really the leaders of this because NAEA definitely put some resources behind this. But I think just sort of on thought leadership and strategy, a lot of folks also looked to NAEA, including AICPA, and kind of how as a group and as an industry of tax preparers to address some of these issues. And so on top of that letter are some of the groups that were involved. And the coalition did a number of meetings with the IRS, and we got pretty high level buy-in. Sometimes it was, it was often the number two, the deputy commissioner, and sort of the heads of the various divisions at IRS participating. And a lot of the focus was on, if you can't answer the phones, if you can't process payments or respond to appeals of various compliance actions, then there needs to be some flexibilities put in place that doesn't cause undue harm to the taxpayer. And I think the IRS tried to be responsive to that. There are definitely sort of, areas where there's sort of pros and cons to all of this stuff because you don't want penalties being sent out that are wrong, or when the phones aren't answered. But at the same time, you don't want the IRS to stop all of their work because you know what EAs do or represent taxpayers in these situations. But this work continues. I think our most recent call with IRS was about 2 weeks ago, where we pressed a number of issues that EAs have been bringing to us. Here's a quote. I won't read this quote, but another example of sort of trying to bring these issues to the forefront. Also, there was a press strategy. There was sort of a member engagement strategy to all of this stuff to make sure it was, the message was getting through. And so I'll let you handle this slide, Jeff.
Yeah, so the commissioner's term is up and it's clear they're not going to extend it. They are doing a fairly comprehensive search right now. We represent a number of groups that have been involved, and what we do know is that they are more business-oriented people, and process and change process and technology and phone services and that sort of thing. Very quietly, Treasury brought on an expert. Do you remember his name, Thad? I don't remember it off the top of my head, but
no, I know he was high up at Booz Allen, and it's sort of like technology change.
Yeah, some of the former commissioners, Goldberg and Rosati being two of them, have really been very active, both with Democrats and Republicans on the Hill and the administration, saying, if you're going to drop a significant investment into the agency, we need to have better planning, and we need to have folks that are a little more nimble at being able to implement this stuff. Because there's what I've learned in the almost 40 years of watching the IRS is they do win over Congress and say, okay, we need better computers and we need better technology and we need all this stuff. But there's really actually a very small window that they can implement. But the agency takes a lot of time to implement. And so by the time they kind of get all geared up and they've got their master 10-year plan or whatever, it's usually the funding window is like, gone. So they need to bring people in that are fairly nimble, that have, real change, organizational change. There's, things like CAF, for instance, the way they do CAF is, I can't think of a more 1950s process, right? They're getting pieces of paper with copies of pieces of paper with so-called ink signatures. They're not really inked because they're faxed. And then human beings are staring at them. I'm never really quite clear what it is they're staring at, but they're staring at it and they're saying, how can I fail this? Oh, gee, the name of the company is slightly different. They're lacking a period after ink. And so therefore I'm going to not tell the practitioner, but I'm going to send a snail mail letter to the taxpayer saying, we rejected your power of attorney. And that's after waiting 20 or 30 days. That's just ridiculous. And so that process just, it needs a process where, a computer algorithm looks at these documents and says, what is the chances that these are accurate? And eliminate the human factor and make it as close to real time as possible. And those are the sorts of things. I mean, that's a do or die issue for us. And if we can get those processed on a real time basis, then we don't have to get on PPS to, try to get fax in a power of attorney. And so there's a real sense, and I think Treasury is behind it, that they need to look at those business processes and they need to develop new technology to speed this process up and get the human factor out of the picture. So that's what's happening. What's going to happen with their budget? There's going to be a normal budget and they're going to probably get more money. Both the House and the Senate are democratically controlled and they're probably going to give the agency some more funding. how well and effective the agency can use that is really going to be, it's really going to come down to their ability to hire and train. And, the way the agency trains people now is they take people offline who have the experience and to train the newbies. And what happens is your level of service goes down. It doesn't go up in the beginning. So they're going to see factors like that. This is a long, slow slog. Reconciliation could bring in a ton of money. And I'm very worried that what they do is they get a lot of money and they kind of fritter it away, and then that's it. They go back into the desert when it comes to getting additional funding in the future. So it's got to be done right.
And Jeff, Robert Kerr had asked a question about reconciliation and what we were hearing and sort of how the timing of that could work in terms of the instructions expiring. I'll just say that, and you can add.
Who's Bob Kerr, by the way? I've never heard of him.
So the so the negotiations are happening on the Hill. Those are largely, a big part of that is between Schumer and Manchin. I actually had a call with Sinema's tax person earlier today to kind of try to get her thoughts and weigh in on some of this stuff. And it was interesting because she and the legislative director said a couple of times, these are two-man negotiations. These are two-man negotiations. So they made it clear they were not part of the current negotiations, which is probably not, a great sign. But we are hearing that, progress is being made. Now there's the issue with the salt tax or the salt cap, which makes it hard. And there's lots of things that make it really hard. But I think some progress is being made. We have heard that at least the Treasury Department, like high up folks at Treasury, are feeling like the 80 billion, or I don't want to say 80 billion, but that a large amount of money would be in there for the IRS. That is in play, that people do see that as a revenue raiser. And so that's a good sign that it's at least in the mix to be, if they come together with an agreement. In terms of reconciliation instructions expiring, I think they expire September 30th. Schumer has said his idea would be to pass something out of the Senate before, early August. If they go beyond September 30th, could they re-up? Could they, do another set of instructions? I think it's possible, but probably, not ideal. And so it's still a jump ball, but there's stuff happening. This thing is not dead, but it's got a tricky path to actually.
Yeah, I think there's two possibilities. One is that Congress needs fake deadlines, right? The problem is when you're a lawmaker, you just change the deadlines. But so yeah, the fiscal year's up and the instructions are no longer any good. But you can take those and pass them through the House and pass them through the Senate. That was a simple majority, and then an hour later you can take up the reconciliation bill. So I wouldn't get too fixated on the end of September. But on the other hand, you could use that as, oh my gosh, the sky's going to fall down if we don't get this thing done by the end of September. Might get a little bit of focus out of these folks. I think that they're likely to do something, throw everything on that bill and pass it. Everything they can. There's obviously there's all these bird rule issues, but anything that raises revenues or loses revenue. So things like extenders, and you could put those on there. You could put the pension stuff on there, as long as it's not policy. It has to affect revenues up or down. And they figure that out and they throw it on there and they vote it, and then they say they've saved the republic, and then they go try to get reelected, which is going to be tough in the House. So I think that September date is much better as a fake deadline, because they could always come back, I believe, pass a budget resolution, a new one, and then an hour later take up the reconciliation instructions. based on those new directions. And that's more than anyone should or want to know about reconciliation.
Another question, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, Jeff, from Elizabeth Logan. Does anyone in Congress care about the marriage penalties?
Yeah, they do when it's convenient. And they get worse. I mean, it's amazing how, in my 30 or 40 years, how many times we've fixed the marriage penalties, and both parties have taken credit over times. And then they change the laws, and they come back in odd ways that people didn't expect. So I assume that at some point someone's going to have a marriage. In fact, if we have a friendly on the Hill next year, that would be a great issue for us to go back to them on and say,
Yep.
You guys have got a whole bunch. You've managed to create a whole bunch of marriage penalty issues. So
yeah, she mentioned SALT and student loan. I mean, I always think about income tax, obviously, but it goes well beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're single and you're filing separately, you are you both got a SALT cap, and so, but if you get married, and now everyone has the same SALT cap, so I mean that's a huge issue. And I'm pretty sure that in the dead of the night when they passed it, the Joint Tax Committee said, you're going to have a huge marriage penalty issue. And they said, well, how much does it cost to fix it? And they're going to say, oh, well, that blows a hole in our ability to get this bill done, because there was reconciliation instructions and they had to meet their numbers. And so they kick it down the road to, for future policymakers to fix. So they are very concerned about the marriage penalty when they're concerned about it. And so I assume that will, the wheel will turn and it'll come back and it'll be a big issue again.
And Robert James asks about ID.me. He said he signed up through the California DMV, but he's had a difficult time qualifying for the IRS version of it this summer. Spent an hour cumulatively without success. Says the software is very user unfriendly. Do you expect any improvement to the user interface?
We're always telling the agency, you should outsource this stuff. It'll be much better. But it was funny. I had one vendor say, oh my God, the agency went with ID.me and they're going to really regret that. I kind of took that to mean they should have hired us, but maybe they had something. I don't know. I think that is for the next commissioner to fix. And the overall issue of authentication is gigantic. Now, the taxpayer advocate has said that they're going to do some sort of customer service surveys on these issues of online accounts. And I talked to the press about it recently, and I basically said, look, if that's fine, the agency approaches this as like taxpayer centric. The problem is the people who are willing to spend an hour trying to get on there and authenticate themselves, or 2 hours, are practitioners, because the taxpayer, if everything goes right, will use their account maybe once in their lifetime, or maybe once every 10 years. Whereas practitioners are going to probably use it, 10 times a day. So, your customer base is different. You need to figure out, how to get our powers of attorney online and in the system faster. And, so part of that's always going to be authentication, and part of it's going to be getting the proper authorization from the taxpayer. So we have a different problem than the taxpayer. And so they need to segment their marketplace into different customers. And frankly, you could even go further and say, the people who use it for prep, what do they need? What are the people who do a mix of prep and representation? And those folks who are purely representation, which are mostly enrolled agents. CPAs don't specialize like we do. So we have a lot of folks who just do representation work. And so, their use of those, that's do or die for them. They can't do their job until it's in the system. So we need to, we've been saying it. It's electronic signatures. It's better authentication. And unfortunately, the ID.me thing pooped the bed. I'll say it that way. But, and so they are kind of just sort of sitting there now, and I don't know what's going to happen with them. I think they're going to get replaced eventually.
And there was a mention of Rettig being in Vegas at the conference in Las
Hey,
Vegas.
what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, guys.
I think it's very exciting. And, there was a question of what should our, should we say something about the EA fees or what should our ask be? Meg, Michelle, and I actually had this conversation earlier this week about, are there strategic things, like if Meg has a few moments with Rettig, what should we be asking for or saying? And so we're thinking through that, but we don't want to, I think it is an opportunity for us to share our thoughts or ask for something. So we're going to try to be strategic with how we do that. But it's exciting that he, made the commitment to come out there. And Michelle, I know we're getting closer to 4. I think you had a few things you wanted to share as well.
I just wanted to bring up our favorite topic, the NAEA PAC. If you're reading EALR every week, you're seeing my appeal to people to support our advocacy with a minimum contribution of $50 to the PAC in celebration of NAEA's 50th anniversary. And many of you have responded to that, for which we are very grateful. I also want to thank everyone else who has contributed so far this year. We have a $110,000 goal to raise for the PAC this year, and we have so far raised $30,000. So if we had 20% of all of NAEA members kick in $50, we would reach our goal. That's about 1,650 members. So if you can do the arithmetic. But we really appreciate the support we get. And we're going to be planning more events with EAs and members of Congress like we were doing the past few months. So I just wanted to give a little pitch for the PAC and say thank you very, very much.
Guys, what sets us off from everyone else is, and representing enrolled agents here in the city, this city, is our professionalism of our lobbying, our fly-ins. I am lobbying. I will just disclose I am lobbying as a lobbyist to the board and everyone to make sure we have a fly-in next year. And the PAC. I can't tell you the time that we can spend in front of a member explaining who an enrolled agent is and what we do is so incredibly valuable. And I've been here before there was a PAC, and everyone said, "Oh, we don't want a PAC. That'll be a mess." And our exposure. I think Thad said it earlier. As the AICPA said to us a year or so ago on a letter, I said, "Hey, I don't think we're going to sign that letter because we have our own letter." And they said, "There's no coalition letter without NAEA." And so that's where we stand. We fight above our weight class when it comes to there are 600,000 CPAs out there. Their organization is gigantic. Their PAC is gigantic. And yet we stand on equal basis. And it's because of our members flying in and their participation in the PAC and the wonderful, wonderful professional lobbyists that you guys have.
Well, thanks, Jeff and Thad and Michelle. That was amazing. Such good information. I just want to note one last question that came in from Jim Adelman about Prometric and offering the exam, and they're having issues with finding proctors. And I can tell you we are actively working with the IRS to address that issue. We have presented solutions to them. We have reached out multiple times. So we're just waiting to get a meeting with the right people to see how we can help them solve this issue. Because we know it's not only an issue overseas, but we know that there's some specific issues within the continental United States as well. So we certainly don't want to make it hard to take the exam. So just rest assured, we are definitely addressing that one. And I would just like to note a few other things in terms of, not only giving to the PAC to support our advocacy efforts, there's a lot of things that individual members can do to support these things. We will have a fly-in in May of 2023, details coming soon. And we would love to see our members in DC working on these efforts together as a group. But you should be meeting with your state legislators, your local legislators, your federal legislators while they're in their home districts, because each and every one of you can be an advocate for the profession and tell them more about what an EA does and what your expertise are. So, this is a group effort, and we rely on our members to also beat the drum as well in their districts, so that they can stay on top of the issues. Make sure you alert NAEA of anything that's coming up in your state. This is how we found out about Minnesota. This is how that whole campaign got started. Through contributions from members, we were able to fight that successfully to a great conclusion. So, these are all areas where members have contributed to these efforts. So I encourage you to continue doing that as much as you can. So thank you all for your great presentation. This was really, really interesting and informative, and we will look forward to hearing from you again in a few months. And thanks to everybody for attending.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
You.